The black medical kit was refused to be carried on board. The black doctor, despite clearly stating she was en route for an emergency heart surgery on a 16-year-old boy, was still asked to check it under the belly of the plane. And hours later, when she opened the bag in a taxi in Boston, the life-saving equipment no longer functioned properly. This wasn't just an incident. It was the spark that ignited a wave of change spreading across office floors, boardrooms, operating rooms, and the billion-dollar insurance industry. Do you believe it? A small complaint, yet it shook the largest system in the United States. Welcome to Your Channel Name, where we tell emotional, true, and inspiring stories. If you believe this is a journey worth hearing, please like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to spread the value of stories that touch hearts. Now let's go back to Atlanta Airport, where it all started. The white envelope lay motionless on Graham Porter's desk like a ticking bomb waiting to explode. The Etherjet Airlines logo in the corner of the letter seemed to be staring at him, daring him. As the chief risk officer of Trinova Assurance, Graham had handled countless claims over his 27-year career. But this time it was different. This very letter had kept him awake for 3 consecutive nights. His secretary had accidentally placed it on his desk that Monday morning, unaware that inside it was content capable of shattering a $500 million relationship between 2 companies that had been in partnership for over 3 decades. Graham ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair at his temple, where the headache seemed to intensify as he picked up the phone. Some business decisions were complex, but this time, despite the huge numbers, everything was becoming terrifyingly clear. "Contact Colin Marsh at Etherjet," he said, his voice deep but firm, "and cancel all meetings for this afternoon." 3 months earlier, Dr. Naomi Clarke, a renowned cardiologist, was rushing through Terminal 3 at Riverdale Grant International Airport. One hand pulled a small suitcase while the other clutched a black medical kit. At 57, Naomi still possessed an incredible level of stamina, a result of 28 years handling emergency cases in the middle of the night. Her body responded to the word emergency like a professional athlete. Etherjet Flight 2487 to Newburyport departing from Gate G7. This is the final boarding call. She quickened her pace. The message from St. Elora Medical Center was brief. Dr. Bellamy, her colleague, was suddenly unable to perform the surgery scheduled for the next morning. They needed her to take over. The patient was a 16-year-old boy named Jalen Brooks, awaiting an extremely complex heart surgery. The hospital administration had managed to get Naomi on the last flight of the day, promising a car would be waiting as soon as she landed. She would have just 1 night to review the medical files and prepare for the surgery. "Ma'am, you'll need to check that second bag," a gate attendant said. His name tag read Ethan. He barely looked up from his computer screen. "We're in the final boarding stage and the overhead bins are full. This bag contains special medical equipment," Naomi explained, her breath still quick from her run. "I'm a cardiologist heading to St. Elora for an emergency surgery. This is specialized equipment that cannot be checked." Finally, Ethan looked up. His gaze briefly met Naomi's face before dropping to the black bag with the small medical emblem. His expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, but policy is policy. The plane is full. You either check the bag or find another flight." Naomi felt a familiar pressure in her chest. It wasn't the worry about missing the flight, but the all-too-familiar realization. After over 3 decades of practice, she was used to the fleeting glances, the small hesitations, the invisible barriers that only appeared at the right time and with the right person. As one of the few black women to become a leading cardiologist, she had learned to handle such situations with a calm exterior, though it wasn't always easy. "This bag contains delicate instruments specially calibrated for tomorrow's surgery," Naomi said evenly. "Could I speak with your supervisor?" Ethan pursed his lips. "Sorry, there's no time. You'll have to decide." Behind Naomi, a passenger sighed in annoyance. Time surgery, the pressure from the crowd. Ethan's determined face. It all seemed to tighten around her. She stepped toward the jet bridge, deciding that this time the apology would come later, not the permission. A child's life depended on this flight. Once aboard the plane, Naomi was greeted by a flight attendant with a professional smile. "Welcome aboard. Let me help you stow your luggage." Her name tag read Mira. She seemed more pleasant than Ethan. "I have medical equipment in this bag," Naomi said quietly. "I'm on my way to an emergency surgery." Mira kept smiling, but her eyes scanned the packed overhead compartments. "I understand, but this flight is full. I'll try to help." She led Naomi toward the back of the plane, where a small spot was available. "This rolling suitcase will fit here," Mira said, easily lifting it. "But your medical bag will need to be checked. I'll make sure it's handled with care." Naomi began to feel real concern. "I can't check this bag. It contains the necessary equipment for tomorrow's heart surgery. That boy is counting on me." Mira tightened her lips slightly. "I understand, but we're out of space. According to safety regulations, luggage can't go under the seat unless it's standard size. Your seat is next to the exit row." "But I'm not sitting there," Naomi objected. "Even so, the bag seems too large to go under the seat. We can't block the emergency exit in case of an emergency." An older man, silver-haired and stern-looking, approached. His name tag read Brian. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. "No," Brian Mira replied. "I'm explaining to the passenger that we need to check her second bag." Brian glanced at the bag, then at Naomi. "Ma'am, if you don't check the bag, you'll need to leave the flight. We're already running late." Naomi felt the disapproving gazes of the passengers around her. She thought of Jalen, the boy, waiting for her outside. She thought of all the times she had stood up to defend her professional rights. "This is a medical equipment bag that cannot be checked," she said, her voice steady. "I'm Dr. Naomi Clarke, Chief of Cardiology at Northlake Medical Center. I'm traveling for an emergency surgery tomorrow morning. These instruments have been calibrated specifically for that procedure." Brian's face didn't change, "Doctor. Or not, the policy is the same. Either check the bag or leave the flight." Naomi quickly assessed her options. The next flight would be too late. She couldn't miss this surgery. "Fine," she said, her hands trembling as she handed over the bag. "But please handle it with the utmost care. A human life depends on this equipment." "We will handle it carefully," Brian said curtly. "Please return to your seat." As Naomi sat down, a heavy feeling settled over her. Not the fear of flying, but the fatigue of a woman who had fought her whole life for recognition. She had worked not just to maintain her career, but to preserve her dignity in every moment. Like this one. What she didn't know was that this seemingly ordinary moment would be the start of a ripple effect throughout the airline industry, affecting thousands of people and leading to emergency meetings at the highest levels. Meanwhile, in the hold below, Naomi's medical kit began its own journey, a journey that could change the entire system. The night shift had stretched more than 2 hours beyond schedule, thanks to a series of delayed flights due to weather turning the evening flights into a chaotic mess. As the last-minute check bags from Etherjet Flight 24H7 slid down the runway into the luggage hold, Marcus Wynn sighed in frustration. Late luggage delivery always disrupted the carefully coordinated loading process. Another batch of last-minute princess bags. His colleague Darnell Cooper grumbled, using the familiar term for oversized luggage that passengers tried to sneak on board. "Why can't they just follow the rules?" Marcus nodded his eyes, following a black bag sliding down the conveyor belt. Unlike the usual suitcases or duffel bags, this one appeared sturdier, with a raised medical emblem printed on its surface. "This one looks different," Marcus remarked carefully, turning the bag in his hands. "Looks like medical equipment." Darnell didn't even look up. "The tag says Newburyport, same as the others. Just toss it onto the cart." Marcus hesitated. Years of experience had taught him that not all bags were the same. Some carried medications, medical devices, or irreplaceable keepsakes. It was his attention to detail that had earned him Employee of the Quarter 3 times in a row. "Hold on," he said, his eyes scanning a hastily written note tied to the bag's handle. The handwriting was neat. Special medical equipment. Handle with care. Dr. EBT. "Hey, this is medical equipment," Marcus called out to Darnell. "It clearly says it's really important." Darnell looked up, his face showing clear irritation. "We've got 8 more flights arriving in the next hour, buddy. Don't make a big deal out of this. If it was really that important, they wouldn't have checked it. Rich people always think their stuff is more important than anyone else's." Marcus was about to respond when the radio crackled with a request for an update on the Newburyport flight time pressure. Always time weighed heavily on Marcus's decision. He sighed and placed the bag atop the stack of luggage, making sure it wouldn't fall. It was the only small action he could take. Not exactly what the sender had hoped for, but certainly better than tossing it around like Darnell would. As the luggage cart began rolling toward the plane, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the bag was still watching him, silently judging the concession he had just made. What Marcus Wynn didn't know, and what no one in the Etherjet operations crew could foresee, was that this small decision, in the moment of being rushed at the busiest airport in America, would end up in the hands of the highest leaders of Trinova Assurance. His choice, like the earlier actions of Dr. Naomi Clarke, was just one small link in a chain of events that would threaten the $500 million relationship between 2 corporate giants. But for now, the medical bag simply bounced up and down with the rhythm of the luggage cart jostling every time the cart hit a bump on the runway, heading toward the plane's hold, and an unknown fate. Meanwhile, as Marcus and Darnell busied themselves with loading luggage on the 23rd floor of Etherjet's headquarters, Colin Marsh was reviewing the quarterly risk assessment reports in his glass-walled office. At 39, Colin was a rising star in the company, sharp-minded and confident. He had quickly risen to the position of Vice President of Operational Safety. He prided himself on his ability to spot potential issues before they arose. On his desk were the incident reports for the month: a minor hydraulic leak in St. Louis, a light injury to a baggage handler in Reno, an altercation between passengers on a flight to Houston. All standard, well-documented, and within the coverage limits of Trinova Assurance. Nothing to worry about. The phone rang, and the screen displayed the name of his assistant. "Your 4 o'clock appointment is here. Miss Diana from Customer Experience." Colin looked up, surprised at how quickly the time had passed. "Send her in." Diana Moore entered, carrying herself with a decisive air that commanded both respect and caution. At 47, having worked for 3 major airlines, she had vast expertise in passenger psychology and complaint patterns. "I need you to look at something," she said, placing a stack of files on his desk. "A new complaint from a passenger on yesterday's Atlanta Newburyport flight. The doctor claims her medical equipment was damaged during transport. The incident directly affected a surgery." Colin furrowed his brow as he took the file. "How was it affected?" "The patient was lucky to survive, but the surgery took longer because the equipment wasn't accurate." The doctor had to improvise on the spot. Several phrases flashed in Colin's mind as he skimmed the file bag kept in the hold, denied repeatedly. Equipment needed recalibration, suffered impact. Had to use a backup method, increased risk for the patient. Who's the complainant? Dr. Naomi Clarke, Chief of Cardiology at Northlake Medical Center. Diana replied, "Not a regular passenger. She's a Diamond Tier member, flies frequently for conferences and surgeries." Colin closed the file, his mind already running through internal procedures and possible responses. "Has the legal department been informed?" "Not yet. I came to you first. Because—" Diana hesitated, an unusual display for her. "Because what Colin asked, because there's a complicating factor. She's claiming that the gate agents and flight attendants ignored her warnings because she's a woman of color." A cold sensation spread in Colin's stomach. His instincts told him this wasn't a minor issue. What exactly is she accusing? He asked, his hand gripping his notepad. She's stated clearly that she's a doctor carrying vital equipment for surgery, but was still denied. She pointed out that a white male passenger carrying a camera was given priority for stowing his bag in the first-class compartment, even though he wasn't seated there. Colin wrote it down, his handwriting tense. When she retrieved the bag in Newburyport, the equipment was miscalibrated. She tried to adjust it at the hospital, but failed. The surgery had to use a backup method, which prolonged the procedure and increased the risk. Is she planning to sue? Not yet, but she's demanding an official investigation, providing the baggage handling procedure compensating for the equipment, and most importantly, Diana looked Colin in the eye. She wants to meet with a company representative to discuss the trend of disregarding the expertise of minorities, especially when they're women of color. Colin put his pen down, leaning back in his chair, his shoulders stiffening. What had started as a routine end-of-day meeting was now a deep undercurrent of tension. Who handled the initial response? Customer Relations sent a standard apology email offering a few thousand frequent flyer miles and a discount voucher. Diana's face showed clear dissatisfaction. Colin frowned. He knew, and knew well, that this would not be handled in the usual way. So, basically, we've acknowledged the customer's complaint without truly addressing the core issue. That's right, Colin Marsh nodded. And with Dr. Naomi Clarke's status and the nature of her accusations, I don't think the standard response process will be enough. Colin stood up, walking to the window of his office, gazing out at the Riverdale skyline. In every passenger complaint there lurked a potential risk, to reputation, to legal standing, and to insurance contracts. His job was to assess those risks coldly and chart the safest course for the company. We need to handle this proactively, he said finally. I want the full-file baggage handling datagate, camera footage statements from the entire crew, and I want all of it as soon as possible. Diana Moore nodded quickly, taking notes on her tablet. What about Dr. Clarke? She's requesting a response within a week. Colin turned back from the window. Arrange a meeting. I'll handle this myself. After Diana left, Colin returned to the complaint file, reading through it more carefully this time. There was something about Naomi's documentation, clear, systematic, that made him realize this wasn't a person looking for trouble. She was demanding accountability. And based on his experience, complaints like this were the hardest to handle. They couldn't be soothed with a simple apology or a voucher. He picked up the phone and dialed from memory. Jack, I need the full crew file for the Riverdale, Newburyport flight from yesterday, including training history and any prior incidents. No, nothing public yet. Just being cautious. After hanging up, Colin wrote another note in his book, Insurance Notification. He circled it, then drew a question mark next to it. Trinova Assurance had been the primary insurer for the airline for over 30 years, covering everything from minor baggage mishaps to serious accidents. The contract required immediate reporting of any event that could pose a legal risk or damage the company's reputation. Was this one of those events? On the surface, this seemed like just another baggage handling error with technical consequences. But the racial factor, the medical context, and the professional status of the complainant made this situation much more complicated. Colin circled the note for the third time, deciding to revisit it after the preliminary investigation results. For now, what he needed was the truth. What had really happened on Etherjet 2487, and why a renowned doctor had been ignored when she warned about the sensitive medical equipment. Meanwhile, in the operating room at St. Laura Medical Center, the early morning air held a particular kind of quiet. Not an absolute silence, but a heightened focus before the start of another surgery day. At 5:30 a.m., Dr. Naomi Clarke stood alone in preparation room 3, carefully inspecting each tool she had brought from Riverdale. She had barely slept the night before. Upon retrieving her medical kit at Newburyport Airport, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The weight was off, and there was a faint clinking sound when it moved. Opening the bag in the taxi, her fears were confirmed, despite the clear warnings the bag had been mishandled, causing the equipment to become miscalibrated. She spent hours at the hotel trying to adjust it with techniques she had learned over her 2 decades of heart surgery, but some adjustments required specialized equipment, the kind only found in an operating room. She managed only an hour and a half of sleep before waking early to head to the hospital for thorough preparations. As she adjusted the last piece of equipment, the door to the room opened. Doctor Patricia Hanley, head of pediatric surgery at the hospital, walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. "Knew you'd need this," Patricia said, handing Naomi one of the cups. At 62, Patricia was one of the pioneering female surgeons in the pediatric field, a time when women in medicine were still rare. Her gray hair and steely eyes were the marks of decades spent saving lives in the middle of the night. "You're a lifesaver." Naomi accepted the coffee. Quite literally, in about 2 hours. Patricia glanced at the surgical table. Her experienced eyes immediately noticed something was off: equipment malfunction. Naomi nodded, taking a sip of coffee before responding. "The airline made me check the bag even though I protested. When I got it back, the equipment was miscalibrated. I've adjusted everything I can, but we'll need to use a backup method for today's surgery." "Do you need to postpone?" Patricia frowned. "I can call the children's hospital for equipment." No, Naomi shook her head firmly. "Darius is ready. His family has been waiting for this surgery for months. I've performed this procedure using the traditional method before. It'll take longer, but the results will be the same." Patricia looked deeply into Naomi's eyes. The determination was evident, despite the fatigue showing in Naomi's gaze. "I've invited Dr. Alan Chen to assist. He's young, but very skilled. If you decide to go ahead, I'll support you all the way." Naomi smiled appreciatively. The two had first met at a conference in Chicago 20 years ago, 2 women in a male-dominated surgical world. They had developed their own language, straightforward when necessary, and absolute support when it mattered. "Tell me what happened at the airport," Patricia asked, leaning against the stainless steel shelf. Naomi recounted everything from trying to board the flight, the gate agent's refusal, the cold, determined gaze of the flight attendants, and the clinking sound of the medical kit when she retrieved it. "Did you make it clear that you were flying for an emergency surgery?" "Several times. To many people, I made it clear I was a doctor carrying specialized equipment for an urgent surgery for a pediatric patient. But no one listened." Patricia pondered. "Why do you think that is?" Naomi paused, her hands briefly halting. "I think a middle-aged black woman at the airport, at some point, I stop being a doctor and I just become a problem to be dealt with." Patricia nodded. She understood. Being a woman in medicine was hard enough. Being a woman of color, it was a journey filled with being overlooked. "So what are you going to do?" Naomi tightened her grip on the coffee cup. "After the surgery, I'll file an official complaint. Not just about the equipment, but about the behavior. This incident represents. Silence changes nothing." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Dr. Alan Chen, the young doctor Patricia had mentioned, stepped in. "Dr. Clarke, it's an honor to assist you today," he said, polite and full of enthusiasm. "I read your paper on the minimally invasive heart valve surgery techniques." Naomi smiled warmly. In his eyes she saw the same passion she once had, the desire to learn to make a difference. "We'll be using the traditional method today," she said, pointing to the tools. "The equipment had an issue." "Are you familiar with the classic technique? I've been thoroughly trained," Alan replied, though his eyes betrayed a slight disappointment at missing the chance to witness her advanced technique. "I did my internship under Dr. Gonzalez at Mayo. He still prioritizes the traditional technique." "Very good." Naomi Clarke nodded, handing Alan Chen the surgical plan she had revised overnight. "Take a good look at this when you scrub in. We'll start in 30 minutes. As Alan nodded and headed toward the sink, Patricia Hanley placed a gentle hand on Naomi's arm. "I'll stop by during surgery. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call." Naomi nodded gratefully. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for the upcoming meeting with Darius's family. Despite the fatigue, the broken equipment, and the lingering weight of the troublesome flight, Naomi's mind was focusing on the one thing that truly mattered: saving the heart of a child. Entering the consultation room, where Darius's parents were waiting, Naomi pushed aside thoughts of Etherjet, the medical kit that had been mishandled, and the systemic disregard she had faced. In the next few hours, her world would be solely focused on the 16-year-old boy's small heart. The heart she would do everything in her power to ensure continued beating for many years to come. Meanwhile, in the bustling financial district of Newburyport, Thomas Whitmore walked into the corner office on the 32nd floor of Trinova Assurance's Northeast headquarters. At 61, Thomas had dedicated 40 years to the insurance giant, rising from a claims adjuster to senior vice president overseeing major accounts. With his silver hair, perfectly tailored suit, and calm demeanor, he resembled a politician more than a corporate executive. His personal assistant. Margaret stopped him just before entering his office. "Riverdale just sent over a flagged report this morning," she said, handing him a manila file. "They've marked it as high priority." Thomas raised an eyebrow. A report sent before business hours had to be serious. "It's related to Etherjet," Margaret added. "Possible discrimination complaint connected to medical complications." The mention of Etherjet stopped Thomas in his tracks. Etherjet Airlines was Trinova's largest commercial client, a relationship that had begun in 1989 with an insurance coverage exceeding $500 million annually. Any issue involving racial discrimination needed to be handled with extreme care. Adding a medical factor made the risk skyrocket. "Cancel my 9:30 meeting," he said quickly. "Check if Charles Morton can meet before noon." In his office, Thomas sat down and opened the file. The report was brief but full of warnings. A respected doctor was forced to check in vital medical equipment despite objections causing damage that affected an emergency surgery. The doctor, Naomi Clarke, had filed an official complaint claiming racial discrimination was the reason her warning was ignored. Thomas took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. 40 years in the insurance business had sharpened his ability to detect potential disasters in every line of text. And this case hit all the risk criteria, medical consequences, racial discrimination accusations, and a high-profile complainant with a significant reputation. He immediately called the legal department Sandra. "It's Thomas Whitmore. I need a detailed professional background check on Dr. Naomi Clarke, Chief of Cardiology at Eastford University Hospital." He paused to listen to the response. "Yes, this is sensitive. I need career details, published records, legal history. As soon as possible. Today." After the call, Thomas checked Etherjet's claims history from the last 5 years. The airline had a good safety record, but he was looking for something specific. Were there any systemic complaints? The results showed 3 prior complaints related to minority doctors trying to bring medical equipment onto planes. None of them were Naomi, but 2 were black doctors. All had been settled with non-disclosure agreements and average compensation. Thomas leaned on the desk, interlacing his fingers as if in prayer. Each case could be explained away as a misunderstanding or a rigid employee. But taken as a whole, they painted a troubling pattern, especially for a major insurer like Trinova, something that could trigger a class action or an investigation from regulatory agencies. The intercom buzzed. "Charles Morton is on the line," Margaret announced. Thomas took a deep breath before picking up the phone. Charles, Trinova's senior risk director, was the one who would make the final call on any actions regarding Etherjet. "Good morning, Charles. Thanks for taking the time. When the VP of Boston calls before my morning coffee, I always make time." Charles replied, his signature Alabama accent coming through. "What's going on?" Thomas quickly summarized the situation, emphasizing the risk points: the complainant's professional standing, medical consequences, racial discrimination, accusations, and the recurring pattern of similar incidents. A long silence followed. "Has Etherjet sent an official notification?" Yet Charles asked. "Not yet, and that's part of what worries me." Thomas said, "We require a notification within 48 hours for any incident that could lead to liability over $1 million, Dr. Clarke filed her complaint yesterday morning. Their internal investigation has flagged it, but there's been no official move. Maybe they don't see it as a $1 million risk," Charles said, though his tone was doubtful. A famous black female doctor accusing racial discrimination caused the malfunction of emergency surgery equipment for a child. In today's environment, with a good lawyer, this could easily go into 8 figures. Thomas countered, "And if it turns out to be systemic—" "I get it," Charles interrupted. "So what do you propose?" Thomas paused for a moment. "I think we need to initiate a contract compliance review on Etherjet." The proposal landed like a silent bomb. This process would allow Trinova to audit whether the client was adhering to insurance terms, including timely reporting and fully implementing risk mitigation measures. "This is a big move," Charles remarked after a few seconds. "Etherjet has been with us for over 30 years. They bring in hundreds of millions in revenue every year. And that's exactly why we can't overlook systemic risk," Thomas replied. "The bigger the account, the bigger the consequences." If a mistake is ignored, another long silence. "Proceed with a preliminary review first," Charles decided. "I want to see what your team uncovers before we make an official announcement. And Thomas, keep this between us. Don't bring it to the board unless you have concrete evidence." "Understood." Thomas said, "I'll have a report by the end of the week." After the call, Thomas sat motionless, contemplating the potential fallout. In the insurance industry, relationships like these were built over decades based on trust. Initiating a compliance review was like cracking the foundation. Small, but it could signal a total collapse. But his instincts, honed over 40 years, told him this case warranted the risk. Naomi Clarke's experience, combined with the pattern of similar incidents and Etherjet's delays, suggested something deeper was silently unfolding. Thomas Whitmore reached for the phone. "Margaret, I need you to gather the special review team boardroom in 1 hour, and please prepare the entire insurance contract with Etherjet, particularly the clauses concerning incident reporting and discrimination complaints." As he arranged the documents for the meeting, Thomas couldn't help but reflect on the strange interconnectedness of the modern business world. A single exchange between a doctor and an airline employee at Riverdale had now triggered a chain of processes that could impact a $500 million insurance relationship. And at the center of it all, Dr. Naomi Clarke, who was likely focused entirely on a surgery to save a young patient's life. Unaware of the storm her complaint was stirring, in the operating room at Newburyport General Hospital, the atmosphere was taut with focus. After more than 3 hours and 20 minutes, Naomi was finishing the heart valve repair for 16-year-old Darius Williams. Despite having to use traditional methods rather than the optimal tools she usually employed, her movements were precise to the millimeter. "Suction here, please." She instructed Dr. Alan Chen, the young assistant, who was keeping pace with her every demand, as if reading her thoughts. "Check the stability of the repair before closing the incision." When the monitor confirmed the valve was working well, Naomi felt a glimmer of hope amidst the exhaustion. Despite the setbacks with the equipment, the surgery was progressing smoothly. Darius's heart rate and blood pressure had remained stable throughout the prolonged procedure. "Good job, Dr. Clarke," Dr. Rivera, the anesthesiologist, remarked. Naomi nodded slightly, her eyes still fixed on the surgical site. The traditional method required more stitches, took more time, and demanded more effort than her usual minimally invasive technique. The results, though functionally the same, required longer recovery for the patient and more endurance from her. For a brief moment, the images from Riverdale Airport flooded back, the moment she was forced to check in her medical kit, the indifferent gaze from the airline staff, the sense of helplessness when the equipment was found damaged. That memory made every stitch that followed feel like a silent act of defiance full of unspoken power. Close the incision. Naomi announced, "Dr. Chen, would you like to finish this part?" Alan hesitated for a moment, his eyes gleaming behind his mask. It was a great honor. "I'd be happy to, Dr. Clarke," he replied, stepping into position. Naomi stepped back slightly still, observing closely, but allowing Alan to perform the final steps. As Alan skillfully completed the last stitch, Naomi suddenly remembered her early years as a doctor. How many times had she been passed over for opportunities by less capable male colleagues? How many times had she had to double her efforts to gain half the recognition? "Excellent, Dr. Chen," she said. "Neat stitching. Darius won't have much scarring." Leaving the operating room, Naomi walked to the consultation room, where Martin and Teresa Williams were waiting. The couple immediately stood up when they saw her. Their faces were etched with the worry of parents awaiting news after a major surgery. Their expressions softened as they saw the calmness in Naomi's demeanor. "The surgery went very well," she said immediately, knowing that the most important thing to them now was the outcome, not the technical details. "The heart valve has been successfully repaired. His heart is stable, and he is being moved to recovery." Teresa sighed in relief, her shoulders slumping as if the weight had been lifted. Martin blinked rapidly to hold back tears. "Thank you, Dr. Clarke," Teresa said, gripping Naomi's hand tightly. "When the hospital told us they'd be bringing in a specialist for the surgery, we didn't expect it to be the famous Dr. Clarke. We've read about your work." Naomi smiled, squeezing the mother's hand. "Darius has a very strong heart, both literally and figuratively. Despite the equipment issues, the surgery went exactly as expected." Martin frowned. "Equipment failure? What happened?" Naomi hesitated. How much should she share with the parents during this stressful time? It didn't affect the outcome. She reassured them, "I just had to use the traditional method instead of the usual optimal technique. That just means Darius's recovery time will be a few extra days." Teresa's expression shifted, her gaze becoming analytical. Her voice was soft but professional. "If you don't mind, what happened with the equipment?" The question wasn't driven by a mother's curiosity. It was that of someone with professional knowledge. Naomi quickly realized this. "It was damaged during transport on the plane," she responded. "If I had to guess, you work in the legal field." "I'm a lawyer." Teresa confirmed, "I mostly handle medical malpractice defense cases." Naomi nodded now, understanding everything. "Just to be clear, there was no professional error during the surgery. The replacement equipment was safe, but I had to rely on the older technique." Teresa nodded. "I'm not implying anything. It's just, hearing about the transport issue makes me want to understand more, especially when it involves medical equipment. You mentioned you work in the airline industry." Naomi asked. "I handle a few regional insurance claims for Etherjet." Teresa replied, "Mostly the regular cases, but I'm familiar with the process for handling complaints about medical equipment. Something like what you described shouldn't happen." Naomi was stunned. She had just performed surgery on the child of a lawyer, who represented the very airline she had filed a complaint against. "I'm speaking as Darius's mother, not as someone who works with the airline." Teresa quickly added, "My son's health is my only priority right now, but if you decide to continue with the case against Etherjet, I can point you to a few contacts once Darius is stable." Naomi nodded gratefully, maintaining a professional distance. "Thank you. For now, let's focus on Darius. He'll stay in the ICU overnight for observation and will be moved to a regular room tomorrow morning. If everything goes smoothly, you'll be able to see him in 30 minutes. After a few more questions about post-surgery care, Naomi excused herself to complete her report and check on another patient. As she walked through the hospital corridor, her mind lingered on the image of Teresa. The coincidence was striking. A mother and a lawyer for the airline, now the representative for the very patient involved in the complaint. In her temporary office, Naomi sat down to document the surgery details, carefully describing the adjustments made due to the faulty equipment and the prolonged surgery time, not just for the record, but as part of her journey to seek justice. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing through the implications of the question Sarah had just asked. The mention of Trinova Assurance made everything much more serious. Trinova was Etherjet's primary insurer, and the magnitude of this case had the potential to ripple through both companies, causing a much bigger problem than a simple customer complaint. No, Ethan replied, his voice steady, but with a hint of hesitation. I haven't informed them yet. I wanted to get a clearer picture first, but I'm considering escalating it once we have more concrete evidence. This could affect our relationship with them. A lot is riding on this. Sarah nodded, her expression hardening as she processed the information. She knew how delicate relationships with major insurers could be, especially when accusations of discrimination were involved. I agree, Sarah said after a long pause. But if we don't notify them soon, it could be seen as withholding information. The last thing we want is for Trinova to feel blindsided. They have the right to know about any potential liability. It's also possible they'll need to be involved in the investigation. Ethan leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair, a clear sign of the pressure weighing on him. I was hoping we could resolve this internally before it gets to that point. But I see your point. I'll draft an official notification to Trinova by the end of the day. Sarah crossed her arms and looked at him closely. You know the risk better than anyone. Ethan, if this does escalate to a lawsuit, we'll be facing far more than just a reputation issue. Trinova won't hesitate to pull coverage if they feel their exposure is too high. And with the nature of these claims, medical racial discrimination, this could get ugly. Ethan exhaled sharply. I'm aware I'll handle the notification. In the meantime, we need to make sure we're doing everything we can on our end to mitigate this. The last thing I want is a public lawsuit on our hands. Sarah uncrossed her arms and stood up. I'll make sure the legal team is ready for whatever comes next. But I also suggest we keep the board in the loop now before things spiral further. Understood, Ethan said, standing as well. I'll keep you updated on the progress. As Sarah left the room, Ethan sat back down, his mind still focused on the email from Dr. Naomi Clarke. This wasn't just an isolated incident anymore. It was a storm waiting to break, with waves big enough to disrupt Etherjet's long-standing relationship with Trinova. The next few hours would be critical. He had to tread carefully, balancing the needs of the company with the risks involved. The clock was ticking, and the eyes of both Etherjet and Trinova would soon be on him. Meanwhile, Naomi Clarke was already stepping forward, handling the situation with her usual professionalism, unaware that her complaint had set off a chain of events that might have far-reaching consequences. She had no idea that the outcome of this would not only shape her career, but could also challenge the very fabric of the airline's operations. But for Naomi, the priority remained clear. Darius Williams and the next step in his recovery. Everything else could wait. Charles Bentley leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to digest the information Thomas had just shared. He tapped his fingers against the desk, his gaze fixed on the documents in front of him. The situation with Etherjet was far from ideal, and the fact that they had missed the 24-hour notification window was a serious red flag. More troubling, however, was the acknowledgement of fault and the clear pattern of negligence, especially regarding Dr. Clarke's complaint. So they've basically admitted to most of the key points, Charles said, finally breaking the silence. Delayed notification, mishandled medical equipment, and a racial discrimination issue. This is going to be a nightmare for us, huh, Thomas? Exactly, Thomas replied, his voice heavy. And the real kicker is the medical liability. If anything had gone wrong with Darius's surgery, This would have been a multi-million-dollar payout for Trinova. As it stands, we could still be looking at significant financial exposure if the case escalates. Charles rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It's not just the financial exposure, though, is it? This is a PR nightmare waiting to happen. The racial discrimination angle, combined with the fact that it involved a child's life, could explode in the media. We're talking about a potential firestorm. Thomas nodded grimly. That's my concern. A case like this could spiral into a public relations disaster, and that could lead to even greater legal and financial ramifications. If Dr. Clarke decides to pursue a lawsuit, the entire issue will be amplified beyond just the insurance claim. And as we know, the press loves a good controversy. Charles leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What's Etherjet's next move? They've promised to handle this with internal investigations, and they've agreed to meet with Dr. Clarke directly. But we need to be cautious, Thomas said, his tone serious. They're still trying to control the narrative and contain it before it blows up. The fact that the notification was late suggests they might have been hoping to resolve it quietly. First, Charles tapped the desk with his finger, his expression hardening. And what's our position? We can't just sit back and wait for them to figure this out. Thomas sighed. We need to make sure we're fully informed and prepared. We can't allow Etherjet to handle this in isolation. This is not just an isolated case. It's a potential systemic issue with their operations, and we need to know if this is part of a bigger problem. Charles stood up, pacing the room. We need to go on the offensive here. We need our own investigation to be thorough, and we need to ensure that Trinova's exposure is minimized. If Etherjet is trying to sweep this under the rug, we can't afford to let them. Thomas nodded, his mind already racing through the next steps. I'll notify the board and start drafting a more formal response. We need to ensure that our legal team is fully involved, and I'll be pushing for a full compliance review of Etherjet's operations and their treatment of sensitive cargo like medical equipment. Charles stopped pacing and turned to Thomas, his face serious. And make sure we're clear on this with Trinova. We need to be transparent, but we can't afford to show any weakness. A company like Etherjet might try to use this to their advantage. Thomas glanced at the clock. He knew the next few hours would set the course for the entire investigation. I'll keep you updated. I think we're heading into a storm. Charles, how we handle this could define the next few years of our relationship with Etherjet and potentially with Trinova too. Charles gave a tight nod. Agreed. Let's handle it by the book, but make sure we're ready to pivot if things go sideways. As Thomas left the room, his mind was consumed with the gravity of the situation. The chain of events set into motion by Dr. Clarke's complaint had snowballed into something far more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. And as much as he focused on the financial and legal aspects, there was a part of him that couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would challenge the very foundations of how Etherjet and Trinova did business. Meanwhile, Naomi Clarke, unaware of the ripple effect her complaint had caused, continued her work with unwavering focus. She had made her stand, and now she was waiting to see if justice would follow. But whatever happened next, she knew she had already done everything in her power to make sure that the truth would be heard. She had agreed to speak with Ethan Morris, the Vice President of Operations Safety at Etherjet, on Thursday. In her complaint, Dr. Naomi Clarke requested a copy of the special baggage handling policy compensation for the damaged equipment and a serious conversation about what she called a pattern of behavior that disregards minority experts. She did not directly mention the possibility of a lawsuit, but the way she framed her complaint and her specific requests indicated that a legal path was quietly being prepared, ready to be activated. If the airline did not respond appropriately, Charles Bentley stood up and walked to the window, his gaze distant as it turned toward the Newburyport port. This isn't the first time we've received a late notification from Etherjet. That's right. Thomas Reynolds nodded, Just last year, they missed the reporting deadline 3 times. All of them were classified as minor complaints. But that string of failures shows the issue lies within the system, not with individual cases. And we've warned them, Charles emphasized. Right after the Fairmont incident in January, they promised to improve their reporting process. But this case shows either they didn't implement those changes or they haven't been sufficient, Thomas observed. Charles turned around, his voice firm. I think it's time to initiate a full compliance audit. The statement resonated in the room like a warning bell. This was no longer just a preliminary review, as Thomas had suggested. It was an official escalation, an audit of Etherjet's compliance with their insurance contract, including internal document checks, employee interviews, and a review of operating policies. Given Etherjet's scale, this audit would be incredibly deep and broad. They'll notice this, Thomas commented. Exactly. Gentle nudges haven't worked. If they're not following the process, especially in serious incidents like this, we need to take decisive action. And if we find systemic failures, Thomas asked, we'll review the entire relationship, including the insurance coverage levels, fee structure, and the possibility of ending our role as their primary insurer. Charles's words were like an earthquake in the aviation insurance industry. Trinova Assurance had been with Etherjet for over 30 years. If the contract was terminated, not only would both companies be shaken, but the entire industry would feel the tremors. I'll initiate the audit process tomorrow, Thomas said, standing up, his voice resolute. Send the official notice, appoint, the audit team request, the documents full process, and send a copy to the CEO and the chairman of the board. Charles added, not just the legal department. This needs top-level attention. As Thomas walked back to his office, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A medical kit being denied entry to the cabin, a doctor being ignored, and now the possibility that a $500 million relationship was on the verge of shaking. The butterfly effect, as people often say, a small change could lead to a huge disruption. And oddly enough, Naomi Clarke, the humble doctor who had handed her black medical kit to the gate agent, had no idea that her calm yet firm response had triggered a series of storms in the business world. The next morning, sunlight streamed into Naomi's office at Eastbridge University Hospital, illuminating the wall filled with certificates from Harvard, Hopkins to Mayo. But she didn't pay much attention to them. Before her lay the latest health report from North Shore Hospital, where Darius, a 16-year-old boy, was recovering well after his heart surgery. Despite the equipment failure, the outcome was still positive. For Naomi, saving a patient's life always took precedence over the process. That was the medical philosophy she had always followed. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Etherjet call at 12 Euro p.m. She had scheduled her lunch break for this call, not wanting to disrupt her patient work, though the incident with the airline had become more serious. Come in, she said. When there was a knock at the door, Dr. Marcus Taylor, the head of surgery, entered. They had been colleagues for years, having faced many challenges together in their profession. I heard there were some complications with the surgery at North Shore, Marcus asked, sitting down across from her. The surgery went well. The complication was with the equipment. It was damaged during transport. Naomi handed Marcus the results. The airline damaged the equipment. Marcus frowned. Did they make you check it in? Yes. I explained clearly it was surgical equipment needed for an emergency surgery. They still refused. And now you're waiting for a call from the Vice President of Operations Safety at Etherjet. In 20 minutes. Marcus sighed. It's rare to get a response from that level. They must realize this isn't a small issue anymore. I'm not looking for trouble, Naomi replied. I just want them to admit the mistake, compensate for the equipment, and retrain their staff. Simple as that, Marcus nodded, then added, Be careful. Naomi, they'll apologize smoothly, but changing organizational culture is the hard part. Don't let them brush off your experience. At 12:00 p.m., her phone rang. Doctor Clarke, this is Ethan Morris, the Vice President of Operations Safety at Etherjet Airlines. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. Thank you, Doctor, for taking the time to speak with me today. The voice on the other end of the line was younger than Naomi had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, carrying the calm demeanor of someone cautiously stepping into a sensitive conversation. Thank you for reaching out, Doctor, Naomi Clarke replied, maintaining a professional tone, despite the lingering frustration inside her. First, I'd like to extend Etherjet's sincerest apologies for the unfortunate experience you had on your flight to Newburyport. I've carefully reviewed your complaint as well as our internal investigation report. It's clear we made serious mistakes at multiple stages. These errors had real consequences, and I want you to know we are handling this situation with the utmost seriousness. Ethan Morris, Vice President of Operations Safety at Etherjet, was straightforward. Naomi was slightly surprised. She had prepared herself for a scripted, evasive apology. Not this level of directness and admission of fault. I appreciate your honesty, she replied. My primary concern is the impact on the patient. Fortunately, the surgery was successful, but the consequences could have been much more severe. We understand, Ethan continued. The footage at the gate and the testimonies from the staff confirmed that you clearly communicated your role and the urgency of the medical equipment. Our staff should have fully supported you, especially given that you were on a life-saving mission. Naomi felt the conversation was taking an unexpected turn. May I ask what the outcome of your investigation is? We've confirmed that most of the points you raised are accurate, Ethan responded. Both the gate staff and the crew failed to follow procedures for medical professionals carrying special equipment. Your bag was tagged, medical equipment, handle with care. But that information wasn't properly conveyed, and no one followed the procedure. He paused, then continued with sincere concern. We also confirmed that another passenger with similar equipment was allowed to store their bag in first class despite sitting in economy. This shows that our policy is being applied unevenly. Naomi was silent for a few seconds. Hearing a senior leader admit to discrimination, something she had sensed but couldn't prove, was a rare and significant moment. So what will Etherjet do next? She asked directly. First, we will fully compensate for the damaged equipment. Detailed information will be sent right after this call. Second, the staff involved will face disciplinary action. Third, we are reviewing our entire medical baggage handling process, and we will update the system nationwide. He paused for a moment, then added, and most importantly, we're expanding our training program on unconscious bias and professional conduct for all frontline staff. Your experience has shown us a serious gap in our training. Naomi felt she had to reassess her initial expectations for the call. Ethan wasn't evading. He was offering a clear action plan. I appreciate your response. It truly exceeds my initial expectations. Your feedback deserves to be addressed this way, Ethan replied. The issue you've raised isn't just about customer service. It's about how we evaluate and respect professionals from all backgrounds. The conversation continued at an unexpectedly high level. Ethan was not defensive, nor was he making excuses. He was actively listening and asking insightful questions about Naomi's experience. Before we end, I'd like to extend an invitation for you to consult with us as we update our medical equipment handling procedures, Ethan said. With your experience both in surgery and as someone who's been harmed by the current process, your input would be invaluable. The invitation took Naomi by surprise. Throughout her career, she had always advocated for process changes, not just making exceptions for those who were persistent enough to speak up. I need more details, she replied cautiously. My schedule is quite packed. Of course, we'll send you a specific plan. It's expected to include just 2 online meetings and some documents for feedback. It won't require much time, but it will have a practical impact. The call ended. Naomi sat still for a few seconds, reflecting. A part of her, the part that had seen so many promises, without action remained skeptical. Etherjet's response was swift, deep, and exactly according to crisis protocol. Was there something more going on behind the scenes? An email arrived, true to his word. Ethan sent the compensation details and the consultation invitation. She would discuss this with Patricia, her longtime friend and lawyer, over the weekend. Setting aside Etherjet for the moment, Naomi put on her white coat, donned her stethoscope, and walked into her afternoon rounds. The patients, real people with real hearts, needed her more than any corporate crisis could ever demand. Meanwhile, in the executive boardroom of Etherjet at their headquarters in Atlanta, Ethan wrapped up his presentation to the senior leadership team. All the issues from the complaint to our action plan have been implemented. Dr. Clarke has been compensated and is considering the invitation to consult on the updated procedures. Although she hasn't withdrawn her complaint or given up her legal rights, the conversation was very professional and amicable. CEO Richard Lawson nodded. At 58, he had led Etherjet through the post-pandemic crisis and was respected throughout the industry for his strategic thinking and decisiveness. Good work, Ethan. What about Trinova? Sarah, any updates? Sarah Johnson, the head of the legal department seated next to Richard, immediately responded, "The situation is tense." This morning, Trinova Assurance officially sent a notice that they will conduct a full compliance review of our insurance account. A wave of surprise spread through the meeting room as the announcement was made. Several senior executives exchanged worried glances. A full compliance audit. Richard Lawson repeated the words, his expression darkening. All because of a baggage issue. Yes, Sarah Johnson explained. They're citing a pattern of delayed incident reporting. Dr. Clarke's case was reported beyond the required 48-hour window. This is the fourth time this year we've missed that deadline. Is this their standard procedure? Janet Chen, Etherjet's CFO, asked. Or should we read between the lines here? Not typical, Sarah responded cautiously. Given the scale of our account, it's extremely rare for Trinova Assurance to initiate a full audit. Lawson leaned forward. What's the potential impact? In the best case, Sarah answered, they identify gaps in our reporting process. We make adjustments, and the relationship remains intact. And the worst case, Lawson asked, not letting her off the hook. The worst case, she paused. They find us in breach of contract regarding the system's provisions and use that as a reason to alter the coverage, increase premiums, or even terminate the contract. A heavy silence descended on the room. The $500 million relationship with Trinova was a cornerstone of the company's risk management strategy. How likely is the worst-case scenario? Janet asked her financial mind, already calculating potential losses. Hard to say, Sarah admitted, but the notice came from Thomas Reynolds, approved by Charles Meadows. This is clearly not a routine matter, Lawson turned to Ethan. And it all started with Dr. Clarke's case. Ethan Morris nodded slowly. That's the starting point. But Trinova is looking at a broader pattern of violations. They pointed out 3 other instances where we were late. The passenger injury in Denver, the runway incident in Atlanta, and the ground crew complaint in Seattle. We've got a systemic issue with our reporting time. Lawson gritted his teeth. Why am I only hearing about this now? Ethan swallowed hard. As Vice President of Operations Safety, it was his responsibility to report incidents. We've been trying to prioritize completing investigation details before submitting reports. The intent was to provide a full report, not a preliminary one. Intent doesn't matter if you breach the contract. Lawson cut in. We signed an agreement to report within 48 hours, not whenever it's convenient. So what if Trinova terminates the contract? Janet asked next. The alternative options are very limited, Sarah replied, her tone grim. Not many insurers can provide the level of protection Trinova does, especially at our current premiums. Lawson rubbed his forehead. We've got a doctor with damaged equipment, an accusation of discrimination. A late report to the insurer, and now a compliance audit. What else is missing? Sarah sighed. The patient's mother? The 16-year-old boy Dr. Clarke operated on is Teresa Williams, a lawyer who has represented Etherjet in regional liability cases. Lawson's head snapped up. That Teresa Williams. Yes, Sarah confirmed. She specializes in medical malpractice defense and has represented the airline in several routine cases. According to Dr. Clarke's notes, she even offered guidance on how to file a proper complaint. Damn, Lawson exhaled sharply. So we're impacting the child of our own liability attorney. And she witnessed firsthand how we treated a professional doctor transporting life-saving equipment for her son. The situation was almost perfect for a crisis. A simple baggage refusal had now become a costly lesson in corporate systems. What's next? Janet asked. Lawson sat up straight, his eyes set with determination. 3 things. First, full cooperation with Trinova's audit, no hiding anything. Second, overhaul our incident reporting process. No waiting. Third, expedite the response to Dr. Clarke. I'll personally call her before the end of tomorrow. He looked at Ethan. I want the entire timeline of this case from when the doctor first approached the gate to when we submitted the late report. We need to understand where the system broke down so we can fix it thoroughly. As the meeting ended, the executives dispersed to implement the directives. Ethan remained seated, gathering documents, a sense of chaos swelling inside him. A complaint that seemed manageable had now exposed systemic flaws and threatened one of the company's most critical relationships. The butterfly effect from Dr. Clarke's medical kit continued to ripple outward. Did she know that her experience had reached the CEO's desk, forcing the company to reconsider part of its operational structure? The answer would come if she accepted the invitation to consult. Monday morning, the Trinova Assurance Evaluation Team arrived at Etherjet's headquarters. Their sharp business attire and company badges made them stand out from the usual flow of everyday clients. Leading the team was Sofia Rodriguez, Director of Compliance Auditing. Along with 4 colleagues, she exuded a professional and decisive air as she was escorted to the private meeting room, their headquarters for the next 2 weeks. Elliot Lawson, CEO of Etherjet, personally welcomed the audit team from Trinova Assurance, a rare gesture for someone of his position, but one that clearly reflected the importance of this audit. Ms. Rodriguez, welcome to Etherjet, he said, shaking her hand. We have prepared all the necessary documents and assigned a dedicated support team for you. We are fully committed to transparency. Sofia Rodriguez, 49, had led numerous audits at top corporations renowned for her sharp, uncompromising approach. She nodded with a polite smile, but her gaze remained cold. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. We will review all incident reports from the past 3 years, with a particular focus on reporting times, risk assessment processes, and the implementation of committed protocols. Though her words were courteous, the atmosphere was clearly no longer that of a routine check. This was a comprehensive investigation that could potentially reshape the entire 3-decade relationship between the 2 companies. Ethan Morris, our Vice President of Operations Safety, will be the main point of contact, Lawson added. He and his team will provide all the necessary information. As the introduction ended, Lawson left the room. Ethan stepped forward, presenting the detailed documents he had prepared. The walls of the meeting room were now covered with dozens of file folders, reports, policies, and training logs, a tangible representation of the transparency Etherjet sought to demonstrate. We have set up direct access to all incident reports from the last 5 years, Ethan explained, pointing to the computers on the wall. This includes internal investigation notes and resolution conclusions. Sophia scanned the room with a critical eye. We will need to interview key personnel. The gate staff, flight attendants, ground crew, and managers involved in the reporting process. Has that been scheduled? Yes. Ethan handed her a schedule. We've arranged interviews over the next 2 weeks, organized by department and rank. This includes personnel involved with Flight 1783. Dr. Clarke's case, right? Sophia said, using the doctor's name rather than the flight number, a subtle hint at the high priority given to this case. Exactly, Ethan confirmed. We've implemented several changes since that incident, and I'm happy to share the details. We'll address that in the official assessment. Sophia replied, her face expressionless. Now let's start with the documentation. When Ethan left the room, a heavy feeling weighed on his shoulders. The next 2 weeks would not only determine Etherjet's relationship with Trinova, but could also impact his career. Meanwhile, across the city, Dr. Naomi Clarke was performing a catheterization procedure on a 72-year-old patient. Her hands moved with precision, her eyes closely following each movement on the screen. An hour later, when she returned to her office, her phone buzzed with a message from Etherjet's CEO requesting a personal conversation. But she wouldn't see it until late in the afternoon, after 3 surgeries and a professional meeting. The corporate crisis that had erupted at Etherjet stemming from her medical kit remained entirely outside the scope of Naomi's current priority, healing real hearts. As the first week of the audit came to a close, the atmosphere at Etherjet headquarters shifted from anxiety to a clear understanding of the scale of the issue. Sophia's team had discovered not just 4, but 17 instances of late reports within the past 3 years, far more concerning than isolated individual errors. Ethan sat alone in his office, reading the preliminary summary Sophia had just sent. The document detailed each mistake, described the gaps in procedures, and analyzed how these gaps had increased risks for Trinova risks that had not been communicated. The most concerning part was Dr. Clarke's case, labeled a major incident with potential damages in the millions. The report emphasized that despite the affected medical equipment, the discrimination factor and the fact that the patient was a minor Etherjet still delayed reporting for 72 hours, blatantly violating the 48-hour policy. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Lawson walked in, not waiting for an invitation, his face heavy with concern. I just spoke with Charles Meadows. He was clear the situation is worse than we thought. Ethan pointed to the stack of documents. I'm reviewing it. 17 violations is a significant number. Not just significant, it's a material breach of contract, according to Meadows. Lawson's voice was grave. Ethan swallowed hard. In the insurance industry, material breach was language that led to higher premiums, reduced coverage, or even contract termination. What options are they considering? Ethan asked. 3 choices, all bad, Lawson continued. 1, increase premiums by 40%. 2, keep the premiums, but reduce coverage by 30%. 3. He paused. Ethan waited, holding his breath. 3, terminate the contract effective in 90 days. At that moment, Ethan fully understood what was at stake. In the scale of Etherjet's operations, the aviation insurance market was small and highly competitive. Finding new coverage under ideal conditions was difficult, let alone after being cut off by Trinova for systemic violations. Which option are they likely to lean towards? Ethan asked, his voice heavy. Meadows didn't specify, Lawson replied, but he made it clear that Trinova only partners with companies that adhere to strict compliance. The implication is very clear. We view these reporting errors as a serious breach of trust. The words from Charles Meadows, risk director at Trinova Assurance, made Ethan Morris swallow hard. As vice president of operations safety at Etherjet, the final responsibility for incident reporting fell squarely on his shoulders. If the company lost its insurance contract with Trinova due to systemic errors in the process, his career would be all but over. What's our response strategy? Ethan asked, pushing aside personal anxiety to focus on the crisis at hand. We need to show real change immediately. No promises, no plans. We need actions already implemented with concrete proof. CEO Elliot Lawson said, his face tense. Meadows said they'll review all changes before making their final decision. I can prepare a full proposal by Monday morning, Ethan replied. A new reporting system, automated alerts, internal review steps. Executive oversight Sunday. Lawson corrected. I want to see it beforehand so I can approve it on Monday. And Ethan, it has to be perfect this time. Ethan nodded. Understood. I'll send you the final version. By Sunday morning. After Lawson left, Ethan remained in his office alone, facing the massive responsibility weighing on him. What started with Dr. Naomi Clarke's complaint about a medical kit seemingly a personal inconvenience had now exposed deep flaws in Etherjet's entire risk management system. He quickly glanced at his schedule. Monday morning, he had a call with Dr. Clarke just a few hours after presenting the corrective plan to Trinova. A strange coincidence, or perhaps fate. Ethan would speak directly with the person who had inadvertently sparked this organizational earthquake. On Monday morning, sunlight streamed through the high windows of Trinova Assurance's headquarters in Boston. In the meeting room, Thomas Reynolds and Charles Meadows sat solemnly in front of Etherjet's 37-page proposal. The pages were filled with process diagrams, implementation schedules, verification measures, and control conditions from the executive level. They were very thorough, Thomas admitted. But the issue isn't just technical. Charles responded, Doctor, Clarke's case isn't just about process. It speaks to a cultural issue. How they perceive risk, how they respond to professionals with authority. Thomas nodded. If we continue to insure a partner after they've had 17 instances of late reporting with no consequences, who will take our standards seriously? At precisely 10:00 a.m., the video screen flickered to life. Elliot Lawson and Ethan Morris appeared. Their faces were calm, but their eyes revealed clear tension. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present, Lawson began. We take the issues raised very seriously, and we've undertaken a comprehensive overhaul. For the next 45 minutes, Ethan presented the restructuring plan for the reporting system. From now on, any incident categorized as high risk would automatically trigger an alert to Trinova, regardless of the internal investigation progress. The new system doesn't allow individuals to delay due to internal assessments. Everything now depends on risk indices and is automated, he concluded. After the presentation, Thomas spoke up. Thank you for the detail. If implemented correctly, these changes could address most of the technical issues. But I want to ask straight. Why did these violations still occur, despite our previous warnings? The question was directed squarely at Lawson, the CEO, as an accountability check at the highest level. Lawson took a deep breath, then responded. We had a blind spot organizationally. We were too focused on completing full investigations before reporting good intentions. But the result was that we neglected the reporting deadlines. He paused for a moment, then added, That was my fault, and I acknowledge it. We failed to emphasize enough that timely reporting is mandatory, regardless of the investigation content. Thomas glanced at Charles. The risk director nodded slightly. The first acknowledgement in the meeting, Charles then asked, So what are you going to do to change this culture? We view these reporting errors as a serious breach of trust. Charles Meadows' words. The risk director of Trinova Assurance made Ethan Morris swallow hard. As the vice president of operations safety at Etherjet, the final responsibility for incident reporting rested on his shoulders. If the company lost its insurance contract with Trinova due to systemic errors in the process, his career would be effectively over. What's our response strategy? Ethan asked, pushing aside personal anxiety to focus on the immediate crisis. We need to show real change immediately. No promises, no plans. We need actions already implemented with concrete proof. CEO Elliot Lawson set his face tense. Meadows said they'll review all changes before making their final decision. I can prepare a full proposal by Monday morning. Ethan replied. New reporting system, automated alerts, internal review steps. Executive oversight Sunday. Lawson corrected. I want to see it beforehand so I can approve it on Monday. And Ethan, it has to be perfect this time. Ethan nodded. Understood. I'll send you the final version. By Sunday morning. After Lawson left, Ethan remained in his office. alone facing the massive responsibility weighing on him. What started with Dr. Naomi Clarke's complaint about a medical kit seemingly a personal inconvenience had now exposed deep flaws in Etherjet's entire risk management system. He quickly glanced at his schedule. Monday morning, he had a call with Dr. Clarke just a few hours after presenting the corrective plan to Trinova. A strange coincidence, or perhaps fate, Ethan would speak directly with the person who had inadvertently sparked this organizational earthquake. On Monday morning, sunlight streamed through the high windows of Trinova Assurance's headquarters in Boston. In the meeting room, Thomas Reynolds and Charles Meadows sat solemnly in front of Etherjet's 37-page proposal. The pages were filled with process diagrams, implementation schedules, verification measures, and control conditions from the executive level. They were very thorough, Thomas admitted. But the issue isn't just technical, Charles responded. Dr. Clarke's case isn't just about process. It speaks to a cultural issue, how they perceive risk, how they respond to professionals with authority. Thomas nodded. If we continue to insure a partner after they've had 17 instances of late reporting with no consequences, who will take our standards seriously? At precisely 10:00 a.m., the video screen flickered to life. Elliot Lawson and Ethan Morris appeared. Their faces were calm, but their eyes revealed clear tension. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present, Lawson began. We take the issues raised very seriously, and we've undertaken a comprehensive overhaul. For the next 45 minutes, Ethan presented the restructuring plan for the reporting system. From now on, any incident categorized as high risk would automatically trigger an alert to Trinova, regardless of the internal investigation progress. The new system doesn't allow individuals to delay due to internal assessments. Everything now depends on risk indices and is automated, he concluded. After the presentation, Thomas spoke up. Thank you for the detail. If implemented correctly, these changes could address most of the technical issues. But I want to ask straight, why did these violations still occur despite our previous warnings? The question was directed squarely at Lawson, the CEO, as an accountability check at the highest level. Lawson took a deep breath, then responded, We had a blind spot organizationally. We were too focused on completing full investigations before reporting good intentions, but the result was that we neglected the reporting deadlines. He paused for a moment, then added, That was my fault, and I acknowledge it. We failed to emphasize enough that timely reporting is mandatory, regardless of the investigation content. Thomas glanced at Charles. The risk director nodded slightly. The first acknowledgement in the meeting. Charles then asked, So what are you going to do to change this culture? Matin Tourtois. 3 specific actions. Elliot Lawson, CEO of Etherjet, responded without hesitation. First, I will establish quarterly compliance reviews, reporting directly to the risk committee of the board, turning compliance into a governance issue, not just an operational one. Second, the executive compensation structure will be adjusted, tied directly to specific compliance metrics, ensuring leadership is held accountable for policy enforcement. Third, I've initiated a comprehensive review of Dr. Naomi Clarke's case, not just as a reporting error, but as a case study in how corporate culture allowed multiple levels of professionals to ignore warnings from a clearly qualified doctor. The third point caught Thomas Reynolds' attention clearly. The CEO was openly linking Dr. Clarke's experience to the systemic issues that Trinova Assurance had uncovered, a public acknowledgement of a problematic organizational culture, not just an isolated procedural error. That's a notable point, Thomas commented. Can you elaborate on what was uncovered from the Clarke incident and how it connects to broader cultural issues? Lawson nodded toward Ethan Morris, Vice President of Operations Safety. Ethan spoke, his voice calm but unwavering. Our review revealed several breakdowns, from staff ignoring warnings about medical equipment to mishandling luggage, even though it was clearly labeled. The delay in notifying Trinova also stemmed from the same mindset. prioritizing internal processes over external responsibility. We uncovered a dangerous pattern, only listening when it was convenient for the internal team. Thomas looked over at Charles, who had been staring out the window for the duration of the presentation. After the meeting, Thomas quietly asked, "What's your take on this? They've done their homework. I'll give them that. The process they've proposed is solid. The disciplinary steps are clear, but—" Charles paused for a moment before continuing. 17 instances of reporting violations in 3 years is a deep-seated issue. The Clarke case shows that the organization's default reaction is to avoid responsibility, not confront it. The two sat in silence for a moment, understanding that the decision being made would not only determine the future of the partnership with Etherjet, but also set a precedent for the entire aviation insurance industry. "So what if we take the middle road?" Thomas suggested. "Keep the contract but put them on probation." "Do you have a specific proposal?" Charles asked, raising an eyebrow. 6 months of probation with 3 conditions, Thomas said. 1, implement all proposed changes with weekly reports. 2, increase the premium by 20%, with a reduction if they pass the probation period. 3, if any violations occur during the 6 months, the contract is automatically terminated. No negotiation. The automatic termination clause is key. Charles agreed. "We need real binding consequences." "Exactly," Thomas nodded. "No excuses, no justifications. A violation means the end drafted." Charles stood up. "I'll present it to the executive committee this afternoon. If approved, we'll send it to Etherjet today." Meanwhile, in Dr. Naomi Clarke's office at Brookline University Hospital, she was reviewing a draft of a scientific paper for the New England Journal of Medicine. The article described the heart valve repair technique she had modified during the surgery of Tobias Williams, thanks to the medical equipment failure after that fateful flight. At 10:30 a.m., her phone rang her scheduled call with Ethan Morris from Etherjet. "Dr. Clarke, thank you for taking the time." Ethan began, his voice somewhat subdued. "I just received some great news from Boston." Clarke replied, "Tobias has completed his post-op checkup. His heart is functioning beyond expectations. Thanks to that small accident, a new technique was born. I didn't expect that." "That's wonderful," Ethan said, his tone lighter. "I've been keeping up with information from his mother. She's a lawyer who works with us, but it's good to hear that directly from the treating doctor." Clarke noticed that Ethan's voice seemed different, no longer the tense professionalism, but as if he was carrying an unspoken burden. "You seem like you've had a very memorable few weeks," she remarked softly. Ethan chuckled lightly, admitting, "You're very perceptive, Dr. Clarke. And yes, it's been quite a ride. Your complaint has uncovered a chain of consequences that I believe will continue to reverberate within our organization." "What do you mean?" Clarke asked, surprised. "Your case has revealed a massive gap in our incident reporting system, one that directly affects our insurance contract with Trinova, the company that has insured us for over 30 years. "Oh, I didn't realize it was that big. You're not the only one surprised." Ethan sighed. "Trinova has initiated a full audit of our entire contract, and we almost lost our insurance." Dr. Naomi Clarke leaned back in her chair, taken aback by the revelations. "So what did the audit uncover?" she asked. "A long string of late reports spanning several years." Ethan Morris admitted, his voice blunt and unembellished. 17 instances where we missed the reporting deadline, which could have jeopardized our insurance contract without us even realizing it. Naomi began to grasp the seriousness of the situation. "And what's the consequence of that? Trinova assurance has placed our entire contract, worth around $500 million, under review," Ethan confirmed. "We're implementing comprehensive changes to our processes, weekly reporting and operating under automatic termination conditions. If any further errors occur in the future," Naomi was stunned. What had begun as a personal experience being ignored while trying to secure medical equipment for an urgent surgery had now escalated into an organizational crisis. With system-wide ramifications, I didn't realize my complaint would lead to such a thorough audit. Neither did we, Ethan responded earnestly, but your experience exposed a cultural habit, prioritizing internal processes over external obligations. And that mindset not only led to a professional like you being ignored, but also caused us to violate reporting requirements with the insurer. Naomi nodded, recognizing the parallels she had never considered before. This is a very candid assessment. We've had a few eye-opening weeks. Ethan chuckled lightly. Nothing shakes up an organization like almost losing a $500 million contract. Naomi smiled gently but profoundly. So what about my original complaint? Ethan answered immediately. We've completed compensation for the damaged equipment, taken internal disciplinary action, and revised the medical luggage handling procedures. We still very much hope you'll participate in helping us critique and refine the new policies. Initially, Naomi thought this invitation was just a formality, but now seeing the bigger picture, she realized this was an opportunity to truly drive change. I agree to participate, she said. When a system fails in one area, it often fails elsewhere. Whether in medicine or business operations, the principle is the same. Ethan nodded, his voice full of respect. Your experience has now become a model for us. Our CEO has even incorporated this case into a leadership seminar, of course keeping it anonymous. I wouldn't mind if my name was used, Naomi smiled. Sometimes the truth carries more weight than abstract concepts. Thank you for that, Ethan said, moved. By the way, I want to share that we've opened an internal investigation into similar cases with doctors over the past 5 years, especially regarding race and gender factors. Naomi raised her eyebrows, pleasantly surprised. That's a big step. What prompted you to take that on your case? Ethan replied. If a head of cardiology like you can be ignored, who else is being overlooked? And if this is happening more frequently with women of color, we need to acknowledge and address it. Naomi nodded, feeling a sense of relief. Not because she was being listened to, but because the struggle she fought for could result in sustainable change. The call ended after another 20 minutes of deep discussion. Before hanging up, Ethan quietly said, Dr. Clarke, if I may say something outside of the usual protocol. Go ahead, she replied. Thank you for how you handled this. You had every right to sue or publicly criticize us. That would have been completely justified. But instead, you submitted a detailed complaint, focused on improving the system, not just punishing us. Naomi didn't respond verbally, just smiled. That was always her choice to heal the system, not just address the symptoms. 6 months later, Thomas Reynolds sat in Charles Meadows' office holding the final report from Etherjet. Not a single reporting violation in 6 months. Thomas said, his voice betraying his astonishment. And the process changes have far exceeded our initial requirements. Charles nodded. They've taken this as an opportunity for a full organizational overhaul, not just a reactive measure. So Thomas asked, do we reinstate the original insurance terms? The data fully supports that, Charles replied. They've demonstrated real capability for change. I just want to keep 2 elements weekly: compliance reports and quarterly audits. They're genuinely useful for risk assessment. Thomas agreed. The two exchanged looks, knowing that the right decision had been made, but more than just saving an insurance relationship, they understood that everything had started with a medical kit and a female doctor who refused to stay silent when the system failed. It's incredible when you think about it, Thomas Reynolds mused, taking notes as he and Charles Meadows reviewed the final terms of Etherjet's probation period. All of this, the compliance audit, the process revisions, the corporate culture evaluation, and the enhanced reporting system, all started with a damaged medical kit from a female doctor, Naomi Clarke. Charles recalled, I checked her professional background as soon as the case started. An outstanding doctor, Harvard Johns Hopkins major innovations in pediatric heart surgery. Exactly the kind of person everyone would want to have saving their child in an emergency, and exactly the kind of person who should never be ignored. Thomas nodded, his expression serious. And it's that very case that clearly reflected the deep-rooted issues in their corporate culture. She's now the lead advisor for the team. Rebuilding the medical baggage handling process, Charles said, turning her negative experience into the driving force for system overhaul. Thomas smiled faintly. From the beginning, her complaint was focused on changing the process, not personal demands. She was thinking systemically from the start. At the end of the meeting, both men understood that the past 6 months had been more than just a lesson about insurance. It was a lesson about accountability, respect for expertise, and the power of an individual who dares to speak out. Naomi Clarke once again walked briskly through the international terminal at Atlanta medical kit in hand. Another adolescent patient, this time in Chicago, needing her expertise. Everything seemed the same. The rushed passengers, the cumbersome luggage, the small arguments between gate agents and delayed passengers. But one thing had changed. Dr. Clarke. A gate agent called her name, looking up from his computer. "We flagged your case. Your medical luggage has been pre-approved to be brought into the cabin. You'll be given priority boarding to ensure proper storage space." Naomi was momentarily surprised, but then she smiled. "Thank you," she replied simply. No explanations, no justifications, no more doubt. It was the very policies she had helped implement, now a reality, bringing professional respect to all doctors, not as an exception, but as the standard. She settled into the front row, her medical kit carefully placed in the overhead compartment. Her phone pinged with a new message. It was from Boston General Hospital. The image that appeared was of Tobias Williams, the young boy who had undergone heart surgery a year ago. Now he was wearing a basketball jersey, beaming with his parents by his side. Beneath the image was a message from Teresa Williams, the boy's mother, also the attorney representing Delta. "We will forever be grateful to you." Naomi smiled. A full circle had closed. Same airline, same airport, but the system had changed. The head flight attendant approached Dr. Clarke. "I'm Michael, the supervisor today. We know you're on a medical emergency journey. Is there anything else you need for this flight?" Naomi recognized his name. Michael Pearson, the flight attendant who had once forced her to check her medical kit exactly 1 year ago. It wasn't clear whether he recognized her, but it seemed the system had changed him. "I just need some water and a quiet place to review the patient's records." Naomi replied gently, "Of course. I've kept a seat in the first-class cabin for you when the plane reaches cruising altitude." Michael replied with a professionalism that felt effortless. Naomi watched him walk away, a strange emotion rising within her. Not because she was prioritized, but because the system now respected the right value. No more arbitrariness, no more chance. Just standards and respect. As the plane ascended from Atlanta, Naomi opened the patient's records, preparing for another surgery in Chicago. The medical kit, once disregarded, now safely secured above her, protected by the very policies that had not existed a year ago, and somewhere high above amidst the clouds. Naomi knew an individual speaking out at the right moment can change the entire system. Not because the voice is loud, but because it is right. The changes at Etherjet, at Trinova Assurance, in the medical baggage handling process and employee training programs were not merely reactions to errors. They were the results of a system that could recognize, learn, and improve. It wasn't about assigning blame. It was about improving the process. It wasn't about punishing individuals. It was about transforming the system. For Dr. Naomi Clarke, this was the most gratifying outcome. Knowing that her refusal to accept being ignored, her decision to not remain silent in the face of injustice, had brought about lasting changes that could save and support thousands of others, even as the original incident had faded from personal memory. In medicine, as well as in system management, success does not lie in compensating for past losses, but in preventing future ones. As the plane reached cruising altitude and Naomi began reviewing the patient records, she understood. There are journeys that are not measured by distance, but by the systems that are improved. It is not the destination that determines the meaning of the journey, but the path that has been corrected for those who will follow after her. The most memorable journeys are those that leave a legacy for others, because by that measure, the Etherjet flight 1487 1 year ago was one of the most meaningful journeys of her life. In high-rise meeting rooms and high-pressure operating rooms, in company policies and medical procedures, in insurance assessments and employee training, the principle remains the same. The system matters, responsibility matters, and sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be ignored to create a change that impacts millions. Charles Meadows at Trinova, Richard Lawson, and Ethan Morris at Etherjet baggage handlers, flight attendants, gate agents, and even Dr. Naomi Clarke all learned one thing. Systemic responsibility requires not only goodwill, but also the courage to face failure head-on and make deep, transformative changes. As Flight 2254 continued its journey to Chicago, where another teenage patient was waiting for Naomi, the invisible threads connecting personal experience with systemic change were still being woven tighter. A medical kit once damaged, now protected by stringent processes, had sparked a $500 million overhaul and impacted millions of future passengers. They call it the butterfly effect, when a small event in one place can create a major change elsewhere. And Naomi proved that not with theory, but with living reality. She refused to be disregarded, and it was that steadfastness that opened the door to change. As the plane prepared to land in Chicago, Naomi closed the patient file and buckled her seatbelt. Beside her was the medical kit, safe intact, placed exactly where it belonged. Following the process she had fought to create, the circle had closed. The journey had ended, but the change was still spreading. In both medicine and system management, the work never truly ends. Only persistence remains. Only those moments of standing up and saying, "This cannot happen again." And because one brave doctor said it, the entire system listened. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Not to avoid responsibility, but to improve it. The most valuable journey is not the one we arrive at, but the one we leave behind for others. And for Dr. Naomi Clarke, Flight 1387 is the most compelling proof of that. A year after that fateful flight, the same doctor steps onto another plane, with her medical kit neatly placed in the overhead compartment. No arguments, no explanations, just one name, Dr. Naomi Clarke. And this time, she's invited to board first. She's offered the quietest seat to read her patient files, and a flight attendant, who had ignored her a year ago, is there anything you need assistance with, doctor? This isn't a privilege. It's the result of a system that's changed, because one brave person refused to stay silent. You see, sometimes you don't need loud arguments or big disruptions. Just one right action and persistence. Change will come. And sometimes it spreads farther than you ever imagined. If this story touched you, please like to show your support, share to spread the value, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspiring journey. Thank you for being with us. See you in the next story.